خب دوستان عزیز تا دقایق دیگه پزشک‌های دوم وارد سالن میشن و خواهیم دید.
I have the great honor to introduce our keynote speaker. For over 4 decades, Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi has been a leader and advocate for the principles of freedom, democracy, and human rights for the people of Iran. He maintains constant contact with his compatriots and opposition groups both inside and outside the country. The Crown Prince travels the world, meeting with heads of state, legislators, policymakers, interest groups, and student groups, speaking about the plight of Iranians under the Islamic regime. He consistently speaks out against the widespread abuse and oppression of the Iranian people, and he calls for the establishment of a secular democracy in Iran. He calls for regime change through non-violent civil disobedience and for a free and open referendum on a new government of Iran. According to yesterday's دیدار newspaper, Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi is considered the most prominent leader opposing the Islamic regime in Iran. As the Crown Prince has mentioned, his father, Ishaq, was very close with Egyptian President Anwar Sadat. In 1978, together with the leaders of the United States and Israel, President Sadat won the Nobel Peace Prize after he bravely broke with decades of war. He flew to Jerusalem, he addressed the Israeli Knesset, and he negotiated the historic Camp David Peace Treaty. Sadly, a generation later today, war and terrorism persist across the Middle East, from the IRGC terrorist proxies in Yemen, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, and Gaza, and from the head of the state, the head of the octopus, the Islamic regime in Tehran. For years, many Western governments here in Europe and abroad kept saying, don't be too firm with the regime, it might provoke war. They said you need to appease the mullahs, that will bring peace. They made deals with the regime. They freed up billions of dollars, and we know where the money went to. We know the result. We did not get peace. We got the horrible regional war of the past year and a half. The Middle East and the world needs to see an end to this IRGC terrorism. The Crown Prince has been very clear. He has called for maximum pressure on the regime and maximum support to the brave Iranian people. The Iranian Crown Prince has a clear vision for peace. Just as Sadat made the historic visit to Jerusalem in 1977, Reza Pahlavi made his own historic visit to Israel in April 2023, evoking the liberation granted by Cyrus the Great. From 2,500 years ago, the Crown Prince called for the good peoples of Iran and Israel to renew their ancient friendship. And most recently, in a letter sent to the U.S. President by the Crown Prince on January 20th, he wrote, Mr. President, you have the opportunity to go beyond the groundbreaking Abraham Accords by helping to facilitate the Cyrus Accords, uniting Israel, Ladies and gentlemen, I firmly believe that if the Crown Prince can achieve unity among all the good people of Iran who are opposing this evil regime, if he can unite Iranians with the other peoples of the world whom we heard from today who are fighting their own dictatorships, if he can bring the promise of peace and prosperity to the Middle East, I firmly believe that the Crown Prince, just like Anwar Sadat, can be the next winner of the Nobel Peace Prize and usher in a great new future. Please welcome our keynote speaker, Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi.
Before I begin, I would like to thank the thousands of my fellow compatriots who have come from all over the world to be here today to demonstrate their love for Iran and their commitment to its liberation. Being here in Geneva, the home of the United Nations Human Rights Council, makes it particularly special. I extend my sincere thanks to Dr. Noor and his team to make this conference a beacon of hope for oppressed voices worldwide. I stand here on behalf of my compatriots who have for far too long been silenced, not only by the tyrannical regime that occupies our country, but by the ideological bias that distorts the truth about Iran. The story of the Islamic Republic is one of deception. This deception, coupled with their own arrogant assumptions, led leaders in the West and many in the media to portray Khomeini as a saint. They painted the revolution as one of justice and freedom. What followed was nothing short of hell on earth. Even before taking power, Khomeini's movement showed its true face. The Cinema Rex arson in Abadan killed over 400 innocent people. It was a sign of what was to come. Once in power, the regime's first targets were Iran's most capable and patriotic citizens: military officers, business leaders, intellectuals, professionals, and public servants who had built a proud and modernizing nation. I knew many of them personally. Their murders were celebrated and even encouraged in revolutionary newspapers, while ignored in Western ones. Many of these men and women remain unknown to the world because they had no lobbyists or political sponsorship. Instead, they were buried in unmarked graves, and their families were denied even the dignity of mourning them. But their memory endures in the heart of those who continue their fights, and in the resolve of Iran's new generation. Thereafter, the regime turned its war against Iranian women. The progressive family protection law was the very first one Khomeini revoked. The mandatory hijab law, imposed shortly after the revolution, became a tool of subjugation, symbolizing the Islamic regime's obsession with the control over women's bodies and lives. However, from those very first days until today, Iranian women have been fighting back. But let me be clear, Iranian women are not just fighting against the forced hijab. Their struggle is not about a piece of cloth. It is about reclaiming their equality and their country. Brave women like Fatemeh Sepehri, Nasrin Sotoudeh, despite imprisonment, maltreatment, and relentless persecution. Yet I see that their names remain unfamiliar to some in this room. Why? Because some human rights organizations have allowed political bias and ideological preferences to determine which voices are amplified and which are silenced. This is unethical and unacceptable. All those fighting for a secular, democratic Iran deserve recognition, regardless of their background or political affiliation. I am glad that the Geneva Summit is acting in that spirit, and I am thankful to them for hosting several of Iran's bravest protesters and their families here with us today. Thank you, Nazanin Akhinjan, for facilitating their presence and the Geneva Summit for hosting them. Just as the Islamic Republic's repression has targeted those of all ideologies, it has targeted those of all faiths. The Baha'is have been systematically persecuted, their leaders imprisoned, their cemeteries desecrated, and their youth denied education. Christians, particularly converts from Islam, live in constant fear. Like their Christian compatriots, Sunni Muslims, Jews, Sufis, Zoroastrians face rampant restrictions and discrimination. The regime's institutionalized antagonism with any diversity, including religious diversity, has threatened centuries of coexistence and unity unique to Iran. The regime's war on cultural heritage has also extended to targeting Iran's pre-Islamic history. Sites like Persepolis and Pasargah, symbols of Iran's ancient civilization, are decaying under neglect, and access to these sites is often blocked by the regime. By attempting to erase these symbols of national identity, the enemies of Iran seek to rewrite history and deprive Iranians of their rich heritage. Even the creative souls of Iran are not safe. Musicians, artists, poets, who are the very heart of Iran's culture, risk the death sentence for daring to express themselves. The Islamic Republic's war on all strata of Iranian society has targeted communities across our nation, across provincial, linguistic, and tribal lines. But despite all its attempts, it shall not divide us. We are not just fighting against the Islamic Republic, we are fighting for Iran. So let me be clear, we will never, ever allow our nation to be divided. We see this on the streets of cities across Iran as a nation has risen in unity. The protests of 2017 and 2019 marked a fundamental shift. Iranians no longer chanted for reform. They demanded the end of the Islamic Republic. A decade after the Green Movement sought to reclaim its stolen votes, the generation of 2017 and 2019 is fighting to reclaim its stolen country. And they have paid a heavy price. In November 2019, the regime massacred over 1,500 protesters, many shot at close range. Thousands were arrested, tortured, or just disappeared. Then came the Women's Life Freedom Uprising in 2022, ignited by the murder of Mahsa Amini. The regime and its apologists tried to frame the movement along ethnic lines, but Mahsa's own mother called her daughter the daughter of Iran. Protesters responded by chanting, "From Zahedan to Kurdistan, I give my life for Iran." This is the Despite brutal crackdowns and internet blackouts, the resistance continues. Manouchehr Bakhtiari, who lost his son Kuya in the protests, remains relentless in his fight for justice from inside his jail cell. His courage embodies the spirit of a people who refuse to be broken. But the Islamic Republic's crime does not stop at Iran's borders. The regime uses its embassies and so-called cultural centers as a base for espionage and terrorism across Europe. When it cannot reach dissidents abroad, it takes foreign citizens hostage inside Iran, holding them for ransom in a game of political blackmail. These are the crimes the world knows about. But there are many more, often overlooked, such as the regime's destruction of Iran's environment. I consider environmental justice as one of my compatriots' human rights. Decades of corruption and mismanagement have created ecological disasters that threaten millions. Lake Urumie, once the largest saltwater lake in the Middle East, has nearly vanished, triggering salt storm that devastates farmlands and causes respiratory illnesses. Rivers like Zayanderud have dried up, leaving farmers without water. In Khuzestan, where water flows for centuries, water shortages have led to repeated protests, each brutally suppressed. Air pollution in Tehran and Ahvaz is among the worst in the world, often reaching toxic levels, forcing schools and business closures. And those who dare to speak out, environmentalists like Qaboos Sayyed Emami, are imprisoned or murdered. Meanwhile, the country that sits on the world's second largest gas reserves experiences nationwide blackouts. Patients die in hospitals, businesses collapse, and families are left in darkness. Even the most basic of necessities, including food to eat, has become luxuries available to the privileged few. In what should be one of the world's richest countries, a growing number of my compatriots can barely afford to buy bread, let alone meat. This is all the consequences of a regime that loots and pillages rather than govern. But what is caused by the Islamic Republic can be solved by its removal. Today, we are presented with a historic opportunity. The regime is weaker than it has ever been. Its axis of resistance has been dismantled, and its domestic legitimacy has evaporated. Now is the time to act. Therefore, at the call of my fellow Iranians, I am stepping forward to lead this movement and transition, not for myself, not for force or power, but to answer the call and do my duty as a people. This regime and rebuilding Iran is here. Mobilizing grassroots networks inside Iran, uniting the diaspora, pressuring G20 governments to impose maximum pressure on the regime while providing maximum support to the people. Splitting the regime and encouraging defections and preparing for political stabilization, democratic elections, and Iran's economic development and reconstruction. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I bring you a message from a nation in chains. The Iranian people have endured more than 4 decades of suffering, yet their spirit remains unbroken. Fighting not just for themselves, but for the values of freedom, justice, and human dignity. This is not just about my nation's survival. It is also about international stability and global peace. But as we have seen just in the last week, from terrorist attacks to hostage taking, the Islamic Republic, despite its rhetoric in Davos and calls for a new deal, is still waging war on the free world. Until it is toppled, it will not stop. As I have traveled the continent for the past 2 weeks, I have spoken with government leaders of all parties and stripes. I know Iranians and their democratic cause has many friends in Europe, and that number is growing. But to those who seek to silence us or stand in our way, I say, we are not waiting for your green lights. The Iranian people do not ask for your pity, they ask for your partnership. Our question is, will you stand with us?
شاه رضا پهلوی، شاه رضا پهلوی، شاه رضا پهلوی، شاه رضا پهلوی. خب دوستان عزیز، قربون شما برم. آره ما نیستم جانبی باشه خب صحبت‌های دلسوزانه پادشاه ما رو شنیدید. من نتونستم در اون لحظه برای شما ترجمه کنم، اما در شبکه من و تو فکر کنم ترجمهش هست و تیکه تیکه هم نشون میدن. حالا ما یک دیداری هم فهیم داشت و در اون دیدار فکر نکنم بتونم لایو بذارم. سپاس از شما که همراه ما بودید. دم شما گرم.